cover today?
One Mama Midwife, and I also do childbirth education. So I am a endorsed midwife, which is just a fancy way of saying that I can practice on my own. I also have 4 beautiful kids of my own, so very busy in between being a midwife and being a mum. So today we're going to talk about the stages of labour and little tips and tricks of how we can get through and help us cope in those stages of labour.
Amazing. And anyone that has any questions through the live session tonight, just drop them down in the comments.
So we'll get started with the stages of labour. So there are actually 3 stages of labour, with the first being your contractions stage, the second being you actually pushing the baby out, and the third being the delivery of the placenta. So with the first stage of labour, there are 3 phases within the first stage. So the first stage is from when you are first in labour all the way up until your cervix is fully open, so fully dilated, which is 10 centimetres dilated. Now, during this stage, your waters may break, they may be broken by your midwife or your doctor, or they may actually not be broken at all, and your baby could be born in their sac of waters, which is pretty cool to watch as well. So within the first stage of labour, there are 3 phases itself. So early labour, the active stage of labour, and the transition stage of labour. So we'll go through what all of those are. So the early stage of labour is the longest part of labour, and this is often where women get really frustrated and upset because they just think that their labour is just not doing it, it's just not getting into labour. It can be quite long. The contractions can be a bit all over the place, which again can be that little bit frustrating. And yeah, you're just not quite in active labour yet. But I don't want you to be disheartened in this stage. So this is the stage where all of the pre-work is being done. So it's like training for the marathon that you're about to run. So it's a really important stage. So if we think of this balloon as our uterus, then we've got the neck of the balloon here is actually like our cervix. So it starts off really long and hard, and actually it starts off at the back. So in this early stage of labour, all of the pre-work and all of the changes to the cervix have to happen. So the cervix itself needs to move forward to the front of the vagina. It needs to shorten and it needs to soften. So it goes from feeling like your nose to actually feeling like your lips. So nice and soft and stretchy. And then it can start actually opening. So with the contractions are going to push that baby down onto the cervix. That cervix is going to slowly change with every contraction until eventually that cervix, as you can see with our balloon, that cervix is completely thin, and that's then where it's going to start opening. So it's really important in this stage not to be disheartened. You know, if you come into the hospital and they examine you and say, oh, you're 2 centimetres, and you go, 2 centimetres? I've been doing this for days. What do you mean? I really don't want you to be disheartened, because it's all of that important pre-work that the cervix is actually doing during this stage. So how we can get through this early labour stage, we can try and rest as much as we can. So you may be excited going, yes, I'm in labour. Let's try all of the techniques and walk around and do all of these things. But we really want to save up our energy during the early labour stage so that we have more energy during the active labour stage. So I always say, if it's your first baby, go to the movies. Go somewhere that's going to completely distract you, and you're going to be like, oh, I can't really make noise and talk to people when I'm in the movies. So try and distract yourself as much as you can and rest. So baths, showers, throwing on a movie. If you want to go for a walk, go for a walk, but really important to balance that rest versus movement in that early stage of labour. Then we come to active labour. So this is where your cervix is now around 4 to 6 centimetres dilated, and your labour becomes a little bit more predictive when you're in this stage. So the contractions are closer together, they're getting stronger, they are coming really regularly, and you're like, yep, okay, this is labour. During this stage, you won't be able to talk through the contractions. So when the contractions come, you'll more than likely have to stop whatever it is you're doing, stop whoever you're talking to, and really focus on taking those big, deep breaths during this stage. This is a stage where you would more than likely be going to hospital soon. So you'd be having around 3 contractions in 10 minutes that are making you stop and have to think and breathe through. So you'd be heading into hospital at this point, and this is where your labor will actually start to speed up. So once you're in active labor, that's when we start seeing the cervix start dilating and changing quite rapidly and quite quickly. And it's important to note that during the active stage of labor that your cervical dilation is still not linear. So it's not that your cervix is going to change at incremental 1 centimeter every hour. It's completely different for everyone. So some people might dilate 1 centimeter an hour, where someone else might go 2 hours, no changes, and then in the last 2 hours, they might dilate 5 centimeters. It's completely different person to person. So it's really important that you consider your own case as a one-off and just as unique, just as you are. So during this active stage of labor, how we can cope with these contractions is water is going to be your best friend, a birth comb, a TENS machine, being up and mobile. So moving with the contractions and finding that rhythm that works for you is what's going to really help you to cope with those contractions and that pain of labor. There are obviously other pain relief options if you are in the hospital setting that you can choose as well. But just as a general speaking, if you're not wanting pain relief, the best things that you can do are being up and mobile with the bath, the shower, and the other methods. We then come to the transition phase of labor. So this is where you're so close to having your baby. So you're about 8 to 10 centimeters dilated and you are so close. You get this surge of hormones as you're getting towards the end of your labor. And that surge of hormones can actually give you this really overwhelming feeling. It can cause you to kind of lose focus on what you're focused on and have a little bit of an out of control feeling. Now, it's nothing to worry about. There's no concerns, but often women will literally pick up their bag, throw it over their shoulder and be like, no, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going home. See you later. And we're like, okay, well, you're not going to get very far out the door. And then they'll be a couple minutes later, they'll be ready to have their baby. So it's a really tough transitional period, but it's really important that birth support people and yourself focus back on whatever was working for you. So if you found that swaying was working, the birth partner's going to go, let's go back over here and focus on our breathing, and let's focus on swaying. You're doing so well, you're so close, we're about to meet this baby. What color hair do you think that baby's going to have? Just any way that your birth support person during that transition can distract you and reassure you that you're so close and you're doing such a good job, then it'll be over in a blink of an eye. So that's the first stage of labor, broken up into 3 different stages. And then we have the second stage of labor. So the second stage of labor is pushing your baby out. So a lot of people are most scared about this part of labor. This is the part where they're like, oh gosh, like I don't want to push the baby out. It's going to be the worst part. And I promise you, it's easy compared to the contractions. So because you're pushing with the contractions, you're literally working with your body and you have this feeling like, oh yes, like I can do it. I'm actively helping. I'm actively pushing that baby. So it can feel a lot better than the contractions where you may not feel like you can be an active participant, so to speak. Now, the second stage of labor, it can go anywhere for a first baby up until 2, sometimes 3 hours to push your baby out. So there are a few things that you can do to help make that a little bit shorter. So our bodies have what's called a Ferguson reflex, which is where you will naturally be pushing to push that baby out, and your body naturally knows what it's doing anyway. But if you were to have an epidural, sometimes you don't feel that natural urge to push, and you may just need a little bit of direction from the midwives or the doctor that's there to say, hey, this is where we're pushing, this is how we're pushing. So generally speaking, the midwives are going to coach you into how to push and will be helping you if you aren't pushing how they think you should be. Seeing a women's health physio during your pregnancy is also a really, really great help, because they'll go through how to push and see, they'll actually get you to do some practice pushes and see whether you are pushing well during that period. So nice long warm pushes during each contraction to help move that baby down and out the birth canal during that second stage of labor. For a subsequent birth, it's usually a lot quicker. Usually it's kind of only 2 or 3 pushes to really get that baby moving and down and out the birth canal. There will come a time when you're pushing where the baby's head is what's called crowning. So the widest part of your baby's head is coming down and out of the vagina. And during this part is where your midwife is going to say to you, stop pushing now. And in this point, it's really important that you do listen and you do stop pushing, because that's going to help all of those muscles of the perineum stretch really nicely, and then they're less likely to tear. So as you can imagine, if you're, going to run a marathon cold, you're more likely to injure yourself and to hurt your muscles than if you're warmed up and you're doing it slowly to start. So it's the same thing with the perineum. We want those muscles to stretch really slowly to try and reduce tears. So really important during that time that you listen to your doctor or your midwife who's coaching you to just breathe as that baby's head is crowning. And the last stage is the third stage of labor, and that's the delivery of the placenta. And as with that, there are 2 options that you can choose to deliver your placenta. You can choose what's called active management, and this is actually the recommended option because it does significantly reduce the blood loss after birth. So active management is where you would get an injection into your leg as that baby's head and shoulders are being born, and that actually helps the placenta to shear off the wall of the uterus. So our placenta sits on our wall of our uterus, and as we get that injection, it helps to quite quickly shear the placenta off the wall of the uterus, and then the doctor or the midwife can then pull that out of the vagina and deliver that placenta. Now, if you chose the physiological management, which is we just wait for the placenta to naturally detach, which can take up to an hour, you are more likely to lose blood. So as you can imagine, there's 750 mils of blood that's going to go through your placenta to your baby every minute. So as that's slowly detaching from the wall, more blood is going to be coming out than if it was a quick detachment and then the uterus is able to clamp down and stop those blood vessels from continuing to bleed. So that's why the recommended option is active management, but you have those 2 options available to you to help deliver your placenta. So that's the 3 stages of labor. Thank you.
Amazing. That was so informative. Yep. Thank you so much. We had questions come through. Is it normal to not actively have to push?
So
is it
definitely.
So we have
to
just do that on its
Ferguson
own
reflex, where your body will naturally push that baby down and out of the birth canal anyway, if you weren't going to do anything to help. Most hospitals and most people will push naturally with that Ferguson reflex, just because it's what feels good and it's what feels right. So you will be pushing with that to help your baby be born.
Okay, and another one was, what is false labor and how would you identify it?
Or it could also be the early labor. So sometimes early labor can stop and start in the lead up to your baby being born, or in the lead up to you actually going into labor. So early labor, as we said, is the practice. So lots of changes happen to the cervix. So that can happen a few days, sometimes a few weeks before you go into labor, and it can stop and start. So most of the time, once it starts, but it can start, do some changes to the cervix, practice how it's going to actually contract for labor, and then it may stop and then start up again. And the main way to know if it is real labor is that those contractions aren't going to stop, and they're just going to be getting stronger. So they're going, no matter what you do, they're not going to go away. They're not going to slow down. They're just going to be getting closer together and stronger to the point where you can't talk through them. And if you can't talk through them, that it's definitely active labor and proper labor.
Okay, that's good information.
Yes, definitely.
And
so there's actually a lot of research that's come out to
labor?
say that you really do need to be eating and drinking during labor. So it's like a marathon. You're not going to starve yourself the night before you run a marathon. It's the exact same thing. You really need to be eating high protein food. So you're not going to be sitting there eating a giant bowl of pasta during labor, but lots of little small high protein snacks throughout your labor is going to give you that sustained energy to continue having your body and your uterus contract and continue with that labor, especially with water as well. So hydration is really important, whether you're drinking plain water or hydration powder water. Either is really, really good to help give you that energy and to help continue you going through that labor and birth. Yes, in terms of food.
And is there anything that you should avoid?
Yeah, so no Maccas on the way to the hospital. It comes straight back up every time. So please, no Maccas, but no acidic food. You don't want any acidic food because you're just going to keep tasting it and get a lot of reflux, and then that's all you're going to be able to be thinking about. So yeah, just high protein snacks like toast is really good. Bananas are really good. Peanut butter and banana toast even better. Protein balls, things like that, sandwiches that are just going to be easy to eat and are quite high protein, high carb.
Okay, great. And I have had another one come through. So I've got someone that's not sure if they're going to be able to cope with the pain of labor. It's something that they're quite scared of. At what point would you consider a C-section?
Well, I guess it depends on what it is you would like for your labor and birth. If it's the pain of labor that is what is scaring you, you definitely have the option for an epidural, which is going to completely take away all of the pain of labor. So if it was just a pain thing, you would be more likely to go for an epidural as opposed to a cesarean, which you would need an epidural for anyway. So I would say that once you're uncomfortable to the point where you're not, you want pain relief, then that's where you would ask for an epidural. So if it's a fear thing, and I want pain relief, I want an epidural, that's going to completely take away all of the pain of labor and you won't feel a thing at all and nothing during pushing, then an epidural is a good option for you in that case.
Great, that's so cool. And then we had, what is the normal period of hospitalization?
So this really depends on whether you're in the public system or the private system. So if you were in a private hospital, you stay usually 5 days after you've had a vaginal birth or 6 days after a cesarean. If you're in the public system, you can go 4 hours after you've given birth, should you want to go home, and then you have midwives visiting you at home as well. So it's completely different based on public versus private, and also when you want to go home. So if you weren't, obviously, your first baby, you may not want to go 4 hours after, you may want to stay 24 hours and then go home. So it's completely up to you in that case.
Okay, thank you so much. So we will be giving away a Skip Up Cry activated soother for this live session tonight. So any questions, make sure that you pop them on the comment section of the post if you wanted to ask Lauren anything further. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining me tonight. It was lovely. And for everyone as well.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.